Now there are different terms used in inventory management to refer to different types of inventory. And these types of inventory or these names come about because of the situation in which that inventory is present or the function that the inventory serves, the purpose it serves, right? So the same material can be sometimes called by each of these different names, depending on the context, the situation, and the function for which it's being used. The first term is cycle inventory. Cycle inventory term comes because for most items, replenishment happens in large volumes at separated points in time, while consumption happens more or less continuously over time. So this causes the level of the inventory to go up and down, displaying cyclical behavior. Cycle inventory is typical of raw material inventory and also of work in process inventory. Of course, it can also apply to finished goods inventory depending on how we dispose the finished goods. Now, to give you a simple example of cycle inventory and why it gets the name of cycle inventory, let's again go back to our kitchen and let's look at the stock of rice that we have. So I'm drawing a simple curve here. Say on the x-axis I have time, and in the y-axis I have quantity of some item, let us say rice or wheat. Let's take rice. Okay, now let's assume that at time point t equal to 0, let's say today I'm going to take the first stock of the rice that I have. And let's assume that today if I go to my kitchen and see how much rice I have about 4 kilos of rice. Okay. Now, what happens to this stock of rice over time? Now, typically, when I have 4 kilos of rice, I don't think of buying further rice. So therefore, this stock will keep going down with time as I consume it, right? And this curve need not be a linear curve. It need not be a straight line. It can go down up like this. Slowly as I consume rice day after day. Sometimes, some days I may not consume rice at all, but some days I may consume a lot of rice. So this level of rice keeps going down. Okay. Now let's assume that after some time it reaches this level. Okay. It's now become quite low. You can see that it's become just this much. Now it occurs to me that if I don't replenish the stock of rice in my kitchen, then after some time I'm going to run out of rice. So in the very next trip that I'm going to go out, let's say I go to the market, I decide to buy a 5 kilo pack of rice. Okay, so I go to the supermarket and I buy 5 kilos of rice, and then I come back and this rice adds to my existing stock. So this is 4 kilos. So when I buy a 5 kilo pack, my level of rice suddenly goes up steeply. Okay, imagine this to be a straight line, although it doesn't look like a straight line here. Now I reach 5 kilos plus whatever I had here before I brought those 5 kilos into my house. So this now becomes my stock of rice. Okay. All right. Now, as time goes forward, this stock of rice, whatever that was, it was some 5 plus x. Where x is this quantity that I had when I made the purchase from the supermarket. Okay. So I have now 5 plus x quantity of rice. And with time, this rice will keep going down as before. It keeps going down. And as it goes down, at some point again, I decide to buy more rice as I go to the supermarket. Maybe this time I had more rice than last time. Let's say that I had some Y quantity of rice when I bought. And at this point of time, I decide to buy again because I may think that, okay, today I'm going to the supermarket and my rice has become quite low in the kitchen. So let me buy right now itself. Let me not wait for more time. So again, this goes up. Let's imagine that at this time I buy 4 kilos. So this goes up and reaches some level, and this becomes 4 plus Y, and so on. So you can see that with time, the quantity of rice in my kitchen is moving up and down, right? It suddenly goes up when I replenish. This is called replenishment. And this is called consumption. Okay, so consumption and replenishment of inventory is ongoing. Consumption keeps happening, and as consumption happens at different points of time, replenishment also happens. So now you can see that this represents multiple cycles with time. So this is one cycle. We had a lot of rice in the beginning, the rice got consumed, and then suddenly there was replenishment. Again, consumption happened, and again, replenishment happens. So cycles of consumption and replenishment happen alternately with the rice in my kitchen, right? So this is not true only for rice. It is true for all the items in my kitchen. All the items that I'm going to use for my cooking, they all undergo these cycles, right? And that is why the inventory at any given point of time of any item is called cycle inventory. And as you can see, this is not only true for my kitchen items, it's also true for all the raw material that I'm going to consume in an organization, as well as the material being processed, the work in process inventory, and sometimes the finished goods inventory as well. So this is the meaning of the term cycle inventory. The next term used is called decoupling or buffer inventory. This refers to the inventory that is sometimes deliberately maintained to ensure that production goes on continually and does not stop if a work center or unit shuts down for some time. This is typically required in processes which are continuous, high volume, continuous processes, which can be in the form of a line flow or in the form of a continuous flow. So when you want production of a particular item to keep going on for time, it's not like in a job shop where an order comes for a finite or a well-defined quantity of items, which you have to produce once and deliver to your customer, and then wait until the next order comes. That's how a job shop will work. But in a continuous flow, you want the material, like in a line assembly or in a continuous flow situation like production of oil, you want the material to keep flowing all the time and not stop. So sometimes if a machine upstream in the production line breaks down, then what can happen is the other machines downstream may run out of material, and just because one machine broke down, the entire process stops, right? So suppose you had buffer, you had built up some stocks, a certain amount of stock in front of each of those subsequent machines. Then even if one machine breaks down, until that machine comes up, maybe a few hours or maybe a couple of days, it may take for that machine to be brought up. In that time also, production of the downstream machines will keep going on, right? And production and the customer's service keeps happening. So such inventory, which is deliberately maintained to ensure continuity of production, is known as buffer inventory. The third term is pipeline inventory. Pipeline inventory is a term used to refer to items which are in the stock, which are in movement when say an order has been placed. Let's say that items have been dispatched from the source. The supplier has dispatched the items and they are coming to the organization, the production factory. So in the path, they are in the transit. Okay, so pipeline inventory, it's called pipeline. Items that have been dispatched but not yet reached their destination. The next term is called safety inventory or safety stock. So safety stock or safety inventory is not the same as buffer inventory. Sometimes people confuse between the two. Safety inventory is a very specific term that refers to the extra that we keep above the average demand that we anticipate in a given period of time, so as to protect against variability and unpredictability. So it is done to ensure a minimum service level. So for example, let's talk about the finished goods inventory of an item in a retail store. Okay, now this retail store knows that it's going to replenish its items, let's say once a week. So it can keep a stock with it. It can order and arrange to have a stock at the beginning of the week, which is exactly equal to the consumption in the week. It can do that. But then to keep it exactly equal to the consumption in the week is a little risky, because very often it's difficult to predict how much the exact consumption of an item in a week will be. This is simply because the demand is variable, the demand fluctuates, and there are a lot of unpredictabilities which come into the picture. So therefore, the store decides to keep a little more than the average expected demand at the beginning of the week. So this little more that it keeps is called a safety stock or safety inventory. Okay, so safety inventory serves a similar purpose like buffer inventory in the sense that it allows us to meet the demand from the next, the unit in the value chain, but it's called by a different term because it's not directly involved in production. It's actually more directly connected to the meeting of demand than to ensuring continuity of production. The last term that I want to talk about in this video is called the seasonal or anticipation inventory. So this seasonal inventory is built up simply because the supply and demand cycles do not fully sync with each other. It may be practically impossible to make them sync with each other in many situations. I'll give you a couple of examples. The first is the example of raincoats and umbrellas. Now, as we know, or we can expect, raincoats and umbrellas, they have a spike in demand during the monsoon season. In India, the monsoon season begins at the end of May or the beginning of June. And in the months of June, July, August, and September, typically the monsoon is quite intense. It spans these 4 months typically. And there is sometimes some rain in the month of October as well. And after that, towards the end of October and the month of November, we see what is called a second monsoon or the northeast monsoon. The eastern sides of India, they experience the northeast monsoon as well. So now in these 6 months, when rainfall is quite intense in India, the demand for raincoats and umbrellas is much higher than it is in the other months. So you can think that around the month of June, when the rain begins, when the monsoon begins, there is a sudden spike. And a lot of people go and buy raincoats or umbrellas, right? And other types of rainwear. If they are living in hilly regions, they may also buy, certain types of boots, which are called gum boots, which help them to cross hilly tracts. Okay, now the manufacturer who is producing these things, manufacturers who produce these things, it may not be convenient for them, typically it is not, to produce a large quantity in some times of the year and to produce almost nothing in the other times of the year, because their employment, their fixed costs, and the way in which their factory works, the capacity that they should have, it's not practical to have a huge capacity just because you have to produce in a large quantity in some point of time in the year. Instead, you can have a moderate capacity and divide the production to meet the demand, divide the production across the year somewhat uniformly. So therefore, inventory builds up. For example, if you were to produce raincoats and umbrellas in the month of January, February, March, they are not going to be sold in the same volume, so inventory will build up. And this kind of inventory which builds up in anticipation of demand at a future point of time is called seasonal or anticipation inventory. So in this example, we saw that the spike is in the demand and not in the production. The production is maintained uniformly. Now let's look at another example. So here, the supply is having a spike. In the sense, the supply happens in large quantities at certain points of time in the year, whereas the demand may be more or less uniform throughout the year. You think of a thing like rice, which is grown in certain months of the year. For example, rice is grown in the monsoon time, right? When the rain comes, and at the end of the monsoon, it's a good time to plant rice because there's a lot of water. Rice consumes a lot of water, right? So certain months of the year, rice is produced or grown, and then harvested, right? And then it is stored in warehouses because rice is consumed throughout the year. There is no particular time of the year which is more favorable for consuming rice than some other point of time in the year. Rice is consumed all over India, and it's consumed somewhat uniformly throughout the year. So here you can see again that there would be certain stocking of rice, right? For times when the demand, so stocking of rice simply because the supply happens in spurts. It doesn't happen continuously all the 12 months of the year at the same uniform rate. So this is true not only for rice, but for many other agricultural products, including other grains like wheat, beans, or different types of fruits, vegetables. The same thing is seen.